Hey, it's TDA and welcome back to Builderment. Congratulations, you made it all the way to the second episode, which means you're now a hardcore fan. Now, we have this whole factory going on here. It's actually growing really rapidly at this point, and to make the matters even worse or better, depending on how you look at it, we're going to have to produce some circuitry, and we're going to need quite a few things for that. Now, do I destroy this facility making the magnets, or do I leave it intact? Okay, who am I kidding? The factory needs to grow, and I actually realized I have copper over here, coal over here, and stone over here, so we can actually make a nice little circuit board facility right here in the middle, and then just export the end product all the way to our research center over here. So let's get to it. After doing some math, actually, these types of resources need a lot of stuff going into them, so let's start out with something we can blueprint and easily duplicate once we have both the funds as well as the materials to actually keep making more of these. So for now, let's stick with 2 machine shops. They are tier 2, so it's the equivalent of having 3 of the base ones. And we're going to need some copper wire and silicon. So far I've been kind of winging it, but let's be a little bit more methodical about how I set things up from now. So we're going to need 2 tier 2 workshops making wire, and we're going to need 3 furnaces making ingots. Now, rather than actually already building these, I'm actually going to lay them out to see what kind of nice looking layout we can make in order to make this not only function really well, but also make it look good. We're also going to need 12 extractors to supply all the copper ore, which is actually getting close to the output of a single belt, and I like my blueprints in such a way that I can just feed everything in on a single belt and we don't have to double up on belts or anything like that. Although we are of course upgrading the belts as well, but we need about 3,500 more iron gear, so that's going to take a minute. And for silicon, all that we need is a couple of furnaces and a couple of workshops. And I keep forgetting that you actually need to turn those around. So you first need to make the sand in the workshop, and then put the sand into the furnace to make the silicon. Now, actually, this is not as large as I was thinking, but we actually need a total of 23 extractors to actually supply all of this. So don't get caught off guard by the fact that this looks really simple, but you need a lot of resources to make this function. And when I'm talking about 23 extractors, I'm talking about the tier 2 ones. Okay, but let's see. We also kind of want to include a coal factory in between all of this so we can power it up. And since these things are really expensive, as I showed you before, 2,000 gold each, let's see if we can fit this all together so we can power everything with a single coal factory. So it took me a moment to come up with a layout that looks not only aesthetically pleasing, but it's also really compact. It does fit into a single coal power plant area. We also, of course, need to make sure we have some room for the actual coal to come inside. So what I'm thinking here is that on the left-hand side of this, one of these city blocks, we're going to have the import side and the export side. And then we could, in theory, build these next to each other in a vertical fashion. Of course, we can always rotate things, but that makes it easy. Now, as you can see, I actually managed to fit everything on this half of the platform. So, which means we can actually double up on our production by just copying and mirroring the build we have already on the top there. Now, I did have to redo some of the belt burr because it wasn't actually working like intended, mainly because you can't actually combine items on a belt and then split them out at the same manner. Similarly, for example, to Satisfactory, where you have mergers first and then splitters, we kind of have to do the same thing over here just to make that work. Speaking of not working, this belt is actually not going to cut it because, as you can see, we all have some of the inputs going on the coal belt over here, so let me fix that. There we go, nothing that a simple tunnel won't fix. Now I actually have to make sure we get all the resources in here, so that's gonna take a second. And once again, I do want to point out that this game allows you to play so smoothly because you can just move your entire factory if you're like, well, I just built it over there just because that was the convenient place to build it, but now I can just rotate it and move it around wherever I want. This is starting to look like an actual factory. I really like this layout, and I really like the fact that it's working. I don't really like the fact that my coal isn't actually coming in, so let me fix that quickly. Yeah, but other than that, it's looking really nicely organized. It's actually a little bit of a puzzle to get the resources in, so we kind of have a mini bus over here, and we have to work with some underground belts in order to split everything. But yeah, that's not really a problem. We have this outgoing belt over here, just combining with the spare silicon belt that I have over here. I did siphon off some of the resources, so this is actually underproducing right now, but, well, there's no such thing as a wasted production because it's giving us money. Speaking of money, we actually have quite a bit now because it took me a while to build all of this. But yeah, we now have logic boards coming in at a pretty decent rate actually. And look, our factory is actually showing up on the map when we zoom out now. So that is awesome. Let's see what's next. And what's next is actually computers, and we have unlocked industrial factory, so that's a new building, 2 types of new items, and in the same time we actually have robotics over here, which is going to unlock a robotic arm. I have a feeling we really want that, but in order to unlock that, not only are we going to need 250 logic circuits, but as you can see, these are piling up quite quickly already, we're actually going to need 1,000 wood planks. Which I suppose is where I could have used the storage if I had known this in advance, but yeah, let me just build some more wood plank production. Okay, I think this should cut it. Get it? Cut it? Yeah. In the meanwhile, we actually unlocked the tier 3 extractor, which means we had 1000 frames in production already, and we now can speed up the extractors to 200%. Now, one thing I'm not a huge fan of is the fact that you either need to go through all your extractors one by one and replace them, or upgrade them, or actually delete the ones you have and then replace them with the upgraded version. There's no upgrade button that I have found so far. Hopefully that is coming in the future. What I am really happy about is how fast the wood planks are coming in now, so we'll have robotics unlocked in just a second. So let's see, what does it do? Robotic arms can move items between buildings and belts from any direction. They can also filter for specific items. That's going to be awesome. Okay, so let's check this out for a moment. We have an input, we have an output. It's basically one directional in that sense, and it has a filter included, so we can actually tell it to say only transport computers. It's only going to do that at a 15 per minute rate though, so it's not the fastest thing in the world, but what this does allow us to do is maybe build some sort of bus. At this speed, I'm not entirely sure that that's going to be very efficient, but it's something to keep in mind while we're expanding. Although, on the other hand, we do have this new industrial factory with 3 inputs over here, and we're actually going to need a pretty hefty amount of heavy metal frames, heat sinks, logic circuits, so it might make sense to actually produce these elsewhere and then just make a single line with all these 3 items and then grab them off a belt and get them into the industrial factory like that. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a main bus type of approach, and then if we have any overflow, we can feed that into the research center. Well, might as well try it. Not entirely sure if it's going to be the best approach, but let's see. Okay, so let's think about this for a moment. I think it makes sense to kind of break down the bus in several layers, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 items, kind of like that, just to make sure that, because we do have to split things off belts and things like that, we keep it somewhat manageable, and it also makes it a little bit more organized. We don't just get a very long factory, we actually get something of a square factory. The reason I'm zoomed out is because we have this whole open space of nothingness over here, so I think it makes sense to start building the larger factory with the bus set up over here, and then we have all these resources on the left hand side, so we can bring them in from the left to the right, and then the research center is probably going to be somewhere on this side. We can always move things, so we don't necessarily need to start building all the way out here. We can always just expand as we go. So, step 1, let's get some basic resources going. So I'm going to build the city blocks around the bottleneck that we currently have, which is our belt, which means we're going to aim the city blocks to produce something, well, exactly 210 items per minute. So, for example, for iron ingots, that could look something like this. It's actually going to produce 2 full belts of iron ingots, and we are going to need 2 full belts of iron ore to come in, along with a coal power plant to speed things up. There we go. We have the first belt up and running. It's going to take a little while for the second belt of materials to get here, but once this is up and running, it's going to make our lives a lot easier. Actually, I still need coal. Weaving in all the inputs is not entirely trivial because, of course, the coal is actually going to be relatively low in demand, so we can feed several coal plants out of a single belt, while the other belts are completely full already, so we need to intersect these. I think it makes sense, therefore, to keep the coal on the inner level and just feed everything else in from the outside, because this belt is not going to continue, and every other belt that we add to that will be very similar. Of course, we don't want this production to go to waste while we're scaling up, so there's the research lab that is actually taking all of this in. Now, I think of it, that's actually not going to work, is it? Because we have 2 full belts, so that second belt is actually going to waste unless we do it like this. Now we have this, it should be fairly easy to scale this up. Let's see, if we select this, then we can copy that and just paste it over here. I don't necessarily need to leave myself this much room though. You can actually overlap these, it's really nice, you don't have to split the difference there. This is going to make sure we already have the coal connected. Now, of course, I do need to switch the recipe to copper ingots to actually produce those, but now all I need to do is make sure we have the raw resources coming in, and we're already halfway there. Well, you know you are scaling up at the correct pace when you actually run out of money while doing so, because these tier 3 extractors do not come cheap. They cost 1200 each, and it turns out it's pretty easy to burn through all your gold like this, so yeah. Of course, that is nothing that grabbing a cup of coffee won't fix, because we do have a pretty high income, and we just built something like 800 gold per minute income right over here, even though it doesn't look all that impressive, although, well, then again, it kind of does. It's starting to look like a real factory. It's a little bit messy, but I'll fix that in a moment when we're going to be working on tier 2. Okay, so a couple of design principles I'm using here is that I'm using these power plants as kind of a guideline to space out my factory. Just touching the power grids to each other like this should hopefully leave me enough room for all of these belts in between. And of course, if I ever need more room, I can just move my entire factory with a push of a button. I really like that feature. What I also really like is upgrading the workshops to the next tier. Actually makes them look more professional. This is the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We're not going to use these ones. These are super expensive, by the way. This actually, just this little build over here costs me something like 25k to just build. So yeah, things are definitely ramping up to be more expensive. And every time I think like, oh, I'm just drowning in gold now, turns out not to be the case. But yeah, this is going to produce us quite a few, what was I building here? Plates, I think? Yeah, iron plating. And then we're going to do the same for the heat sinks, the wire, maybe split those two up. Just have to look into how much of each we actually need, and then we can always add more to the line. So there is that. So let's see if we can get tier 2 working. Okay, not bad. This is looking a lot more organized already. And if you're wondering what these gold vaults are actually pretty much the same thing as the research labs, with one big difference is that they only turn things into gold. But you can also build as many of these as you want. They do cost 2000 gold to build, so they're not cheap. But it's very convenient, as you can see, just to have these stopgaps here without having to rely on a limited number of research labs. It might look like we have way too much space over here, but we're probably going to have to add in a couple of coal belts and things like that, so I'll just leave it as it is for now. We're also going to be able to consolidate a couple of belts, as you can see, like over here, which is where the robotic arms is going to come in a bit. But for now, the first thing I need to focus on, I kind of made my layout over here. We're going to need some more of those base resources like wood, as well as sand, things like that, because of course we need all of that for the higher tier items. Okay, so I've added sand and planks to the mix, and I do have to make one rectification, because apparently gold vaults do have a limit. You can only build 3 of them, so I'm not entirely sure why that is. But there's no spamming either research labs or gold vaults across the map. Nope, you are going to have to deal with a limited amount of those. Not entirely sure again why, but that's how it is. Now, I've also found that because of expanding the higher tiers is so expensive, I've actually started building things at the base level, like tier 1, and then building another part, making sure all the logistics is in place. That actually brings in more money, so there's a good reason to do that. And then upgrading the factory as I go. And now, of course, upgrading does need to happen in a balanced manner, because, well, there's no point in having tier 3 workshops if you don't have the materials to supply that. But actually upgrading the extractors is actually pretty expensive as well. It takes about 1200 gold per extractor. So if you have to build 14 of them and upgrade them, that's like 15k gold. So as you can see, even though I'm raking in the money quite fast, that does actually take some time. So it's a kind of a balancing act, but it gives you something to do other than just designing and plopping it down. You actually do need to put some thought in developing your factory step by step. Now, one thing that I found a bit counterintuitive is that making more complicated items doesn't actually increase the value. And by that I mean that you do see the value per item going up, but the inputs are pretty much identical in value as the output. So for example, over here, the metal frame is 12 gold, the heat sinks in total are 15 gold, so that's 27 total. Then we need to put in 3 logic circuits that are each 10 gold each, I believe. So basically we're putting in 57 gold worth of items to just make one computer that is going to cost us, is going to gain us 60 gold. So in terms of gold making, that's a tiny margin for a lot of work and a lot of infrastructure required in order to do so. So it takes forever to gain that tiny little profit margin back. So what you actually should be doing if you want to increase your inputs, your gold inputs, is just make like planks or whatever and just spam those, make sure those go into a vault somewhere. The problem with that is, and that might be the reason why the buildings are limited, is that there's only going to be so much places where you can put those. So in that regard, it does make sense that you should want to keep upgrading them, because you're going to run out of space to actually transport your items towards and turn them into money. Okay, so I thought I was going to be smart and just build a little ore production facility and just get a little bit of extra gold. I actually removed all the other gold vaults and research centers to show you that is not going to work. These things are actually completely useless. So there is actually one transaction or one production item that creates value, and that's the first one. So keep that in mind if you want to repeat that trick. Now, of course, that's easy enough to solve by just adding some base production items, and these are really cheap, so these do earn themselves back really quick. Just don't forget to do that. But all of the money is not going to waste, because as you can see, we have a pretty decent bus over here with all the base materials that are now being distributed to fully upgraded base production buildings that are then upgraded to the next tier after that. So we're producing some wooded frames over here, some silicon over here, some copper wire over here, some heat frames over here, and some metal plates over here. And then we're turning those plates into frames over here, metal frames that is. We're also putting the logic boards on the logic circuits, I believe they're called, on the belt. And we're actually bringing in the heat frames from down here, because we're not using them in the second tier, but we need them in the third tier. So this is where we get this nice little sushi belt over here. And then look, we have the robotic arms actually putting the things from the belt on the belt where they need to go, and putting them into this industrial factory where they're being turned into computers. So all of this production, like literally all of these base resources, are actually being transformed into these few computers over here. So you can see where blueprinting is going to be important, because if you have to scale this entire thing up in any significant way, you don't want to have to build this entire thing all over again. Well, you do want to build it all over again, just not manually. So yay, blueprinting. However, we're not even close to done with this game yet, because as you can see, well, there's just a little bit of the technology tree to go, and honestly at the end we're talking about Earth teleporters and quantum entanglement and matter duplication, and I have no idea what all of that means, because right now we just discovered steel production. And well, I think that is going to be something that we can explore in the next episode, where, well, we already scaled up massively in this one, so you can only wonder what's going to happen in the next one, and if you want to find out, make sure you join me. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I look forward to catching you in the next one.